For decades, this story sounded like fiction. It wasn't in the newspapers, it wasn't taught in schools, it wasn't discussed in public. Yet it existed, hidden in vaults, classified files, and the fragmented memories of people who would never be heard. In the silence of the Cold War, while the world feared nuclear annihilation, a far quieter war was being fought. Not for territory, not for oil, not for ideology, but for the human mind. On an ordinary morning in the 1950s, a man wakes up without knowing where he is. The ceiling is white, the light is painfully bright. His arms are strapped down with leather restraints. He tries to speak, but his throat is dry. No one answers, only footsteps. A figure in a lab coat enters the room. No name, no explanation. The person simply prepares a syringe filled with a clear liquid. The man struggles, but his body won't move. The needle slides into his vein. Within minutes, the world begins to unravel. The walls seem to breathe. Sounds echo as if they're coming from inside his skull. Time loses all meaning. Fear grows without shape, without cause, without end. He doesn't know it, but he has just become a test subject in one of the most disturbing secret programs in modern history, Project MK Ultra. To understand why something like this existed, you have to return to the suffocating atmosphere of the Cold War. After World War II, the planet was split into two irreconcilable blocks. On one side, the United States and its allies. On the other, the Soviet Union and its sphere of influence. This was not just a military standoff, it was a total ideological conflict. Each side believed the other posed an existential threat. But one fear in particular haunted American strategists, the possibility that the enemy had discovered how to control the human mind. That fear did not come from nowhere. During the Korean War, several American prisoners returned home displaying strange behavior. Some expressed sympathy for communism. Others openly criticized the United States. A few even refused to return home at all. To the American public, it was incomprehensible. How could trained patriotic soldiers change so drastically? The explanation that gained traction was terrifying: brainwashing. Intelligence reports suggested that Chinese and Soviet forces were using advanced psychological techniques, extreme isolation, sensory deprivation, and ideological pressure to reprogram prisoners. If true, it meant the enemy possessed an invisible weapon, one capable of turning allies into traitors without firing a single shot. The CIA concluded it could not afford to fall behind. If the mind could be manipulated, they needed to learn how to do it first. So in 1953, MK Ultra was officially born. The name was deliberately obscure. It revealed nothing about its purpose, just another code among hundreds of classified projects. But behind it lay a massive ambition to determine whether thoughts, memories, decisions, and behavior could be predictably controlled, or more bluntly, to create a method for controlling people. The program was placed under the direction of chemist Sidney Gottlieb, a quiet, unassuming man deeply committed to the CIA's mission. He believed that if mind control were possible, it would fundamentally change warfare and espionage. Gottlieb was given virtually unlimited funding and unusual autonomy. MK Ultra operated with minimal oversight. Many of its activities were so secret that even within the CIA, few had full visibility. To avoid detection, funding was funneled through front organizations and indirect contracts. Universities, hospitals, and laboratories received money believing they were participating in legitimate research. Some scientists never knew who was truly financing their work. Others knew and chose to participate. The program was divided into dozens of sub-projects. Each explored a different path to mental manipulation: drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, psychological torture, conditioning, chemical agents, and more. But one element quickly stood out as the most promising tool: LSD. At the time, the substance was poorly understood. Its effects were unpredictable, intense, and deeply destabilizing. Reports described radical changes in perception, ego dissolution, and experiences that could feel mystical or terrifying. To the CIA, this was ideal. If a drug could completely disorganize the mind, perhaps it could also make it vulnerable to suggestion or reprogramming. Testing began quickly. At first, volunteers were recruited from military personnel, government employees, and students. Many believed they were participating in ordinary medical research. Few were informed of the real risks. Soon, however, the experiments crossed every ethical boundary. Civilians began receiving LSD without consent. In bars, clinics, social gatherings, and even private homes, agents secretly administered the drug to observe spontaneous reactions. In many cases, the individuals had no psychological preparation for an intense psychedelic experience. The results were devastating. People fell into absolute panic, convinced they were going insane or dying. Some developed permanent trauma. Others suffered psychotic episodes that never fully disappeared. But to those running the program, this was simply data. Among the most controversial operations were secret apartments equipped with one-way mirrors and recording systems. Women were hired to lure men into intimate encounters while agents observed from behind the wall. During the encounter, drinks were laced with LSD. The goal was to study how individuals behaved under extreme psychological and emotional vulnerability. It was a disturbing blend of espionage, voyeurism, and human experimentation. None of it was revealed to the public at the time. But drugs were only one part of the project. Researchers also explored deep sensory deprivation, environments with no light, no sound, no tactile input. The theory was that without external references, the brain would enter a highly suggestible state. Some participants began hallucinating within hours. Others suffered emotional breakdowns. Experiments were also conducted with extreme isolation, prolonged confinement, and sleep manipulation. Individuals were kept awake for days, interrogated repeatedly, or subjected to unpredictable cycles of stimulation and deprivation. The goal was to break psychological resistance. Perhaps the most brutal methods involved electroshock at intensities far beyond standard medical use. In some cases, shocks were administered repeatedly until the patient lost coherent thought altogether. Some researchers believed massive shocks could erase memories or dismantle established mental patterns. After that, new information could be implanted. This idea, destroying a personality and rebuilding it, was central to the dream of absolute mind control. In practice, however, the results rarely came close to that vision. Instead of obedient, reprogrammed individuals, many patients emerged profoundly damaged. Some could no longer care for themselves. Others lost basic abilities like reading, writing, or recognizing loved ones. In many cases, the damage was permanent. MK-Ultra also extended beyond US borders. Institutions in Canada participated in similar experiments, including highly invasive procedures on psychiatric patients who believed they were receiving standard treatment. They had no idea they were being used as test subjects in an international secret program. For nearly 2 decades, MK-Ultra operated in the shadows. Its results were evaluated internally. Its failures were rarely documented clearly, and its victims had no voice. Then in the 1970s, a series of events began to threaten that silence. The Watergate scandal shattered public trust in the US government. Investigations exposed abuses of power and covert operations. Congress began demanding greater transparency from intelligence agencies. Inside the CIA, fear grew that secret programs would be uncovered. In 1973, the agency's director ordered the destruction of most MK-Ultra files. Documents were shredded, burned, or discarded. The goal was to eliminate detailed evidence of the program's activities. If anyone investigated later, they would find only fragments. But not everything was destroyed. Some financial records survived due to an administrative oversight. These documents revealed payments to institutions and researchers tied to obscure projects. Investigators began following the trail. Testimonies from victims and former personnel gradually surfaced. Public hearings exposed shocking details. Drug experiments without consent, coercive techniques, psychological manipulation, and severe ethical violations. The American public was stunned. The idea that the government had secretly tested on its own citizens felt like something out of a dystopian nightmare, but it was real. Even so, many questions remained unanswered. How many people were unknowingly involved? How many suffered permanent damage? What results were actually achieved? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, if the program had officially ended, why were so many documents destroyed? Officially, MKUltra ended in the 1970s, but the world of espionage rarely abandons research deemed strategically valuable. Technology evolves, methods grow more sophisticated, programs change names. Some experts believe studies on psychological manipulation continued under different projects, possibly incorporating advances in neuroscience, pharmacology, and technology. If true, the experiments of the past may have been only the beginning. Today, MKUltra remains a disturbing reminder of how far governments may go when operating without oversight under the banner of national security. It was not a battle, not a terrorist attack, not a nuclear weapon. It was something far more subtle and perhaps more unsettling, an attempt to dominate the most intimate territory that exists, the human mind. Because if thoughts, memories, and perceptions can be manipulated, then the very idea of freedom becomes fragile. And that is MKUltra's darkest legacy, not only what was done in the past, but what it revealed about what is possible. If you want to uncover humanity's forgotten secrets, subscribe to The Hidden.